Hello, Megan, and a very warm welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with me today. Now, I was really looking forward to this chat and our conversation, you sharing your journey because I know your insights will be really helpful for so many community of practitioners, because they go through the same aspects when they start, when they're, from learning to doing. That's where they struggle with. And that's what we would love to know. How did you do it, and what are your what's the whole aspect about? So, shall we dive in?
Yes, what would you like to know first?
First, we want to know about you. Tell me about you. Tell me about, just your background. Where are you in this world? All about you.
Okay, so at the moment I run a homeopathic practice in Bristol in England, but I haven't always been here. I started my journey very late in time. I didn't come across homeopathy until I was 50,
Okay.
and then I fell into it by chance. I always say this was meant to be. I got completely fed up with my job. I was living in Helsinki in Finland at the moment, at that time, and I decided I wanted to be a healer. I was fed up with teaching and translating. So I went to the local college of alternative medicine and I picked up their brochure and I selected a course at random that I could afford and was the right length. I didn't know anything about any of them, and that was homeopathy. So I must be the only person that started on a homeopathy training without the slightest clue what homeopathy is. But by the time that I understood it, which took a while, it was just so weird. Um, by the time I understood it, I was completely hooked. And because we were practicing from the beginning, I knew it worked. So that was never an issue. It was just a question of understanding what on earth it was all about.
Wow. So, talk about your experience about homeopathy, like learning it in school. What was weird? What was fascinating?
I couldn't understand the simplest, like I couldn't understand how if somebody had cold feet, you gave them a remedy that made their feet cold. I mean, it was as basic as that. I knew nothing about, I'd heard the word, but I knew nothing about homeopathy. I was just here because if you learnt homeopathy or osteopathy or anything else, you could help people, and that was fine. So it took, I would say, the best part of a year before I understood what it was all about. Everything seemed so upside down.
Got you. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Take us further on. So, when did you finish school and when did you decide you wanted to practice?
So I finished school in 2004 and I felt completely unready to practice. I felt like I didn't know a thing, and I certainly didn't know anything about how to run a practice. And so I sat on the sidelines for a year. And then I thought, well, I have to take the plunge. So, and during that year, I did try and find out from people, how much do you charge? How do you bill them? How do you send them the remedy? Because we got none of that in our training. It was a classical homeopathy training and it was very good. It reached international standards. I think we had one afternoon on treating acutes and one afternoon on how to run a business. And that was that. So I was completely at sea. And so I did try and find out things about that during that year. But at the end of it, I just thought, well, I have to start. I can't sit on the edge forever. And that was when I booked a room for a couple of evenings a week and made little notices which people took down and I put them back up and so on and so forth.
Wow. So, you
Yes,
just took the plunge one day because that was your passion to help people. That's the whole idea you started on.
yes, 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 yes.
So, take us back to that time when you started. What was your biggest challenge, Megan?
The biggest challenge was my lack of confidence and my feeling that, hey, I'm not ready. I don't know nearly enough to be able to take on patients and know that I'll be able to find the right thing. That was one challenge. And the challenge of not knowing the practical details was also formidable. Yeah.
Hmm. So, what did you do to overcome? What were the steps you took?
The steps I took were just to start in nerves and trembling and a few people came from here and there. I let my friends know I was toting for business. I put up notices, as I said. I got a few customers and then I got a bit of beginner's luck. And you get a little bit more confidence that, oh, okay, that worked.
Yeah.
And so I took it from there.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Really, really brave. So tell us about, what were your highlights in that first year when you say, I got lucky, but it isn't luck? Tell us about that. What was
Um, I
the
just
aha?
had uh well, I had a few people that came and I very nervously repertorized and because my learning was quite small there. I repertorized and followed the instructions about what to do and gave them something. And some of the time, some of them got better, which is encouraging.
Great.
And then one of my highlights was the lady who actually came to me. Uh, she was in fourth stage cancer and she had been to a friend of mine. She had had a cancer of the ovaries, I think, and she'd had a complete hysterectomy, and then they had found something on her liver, so they had given her cytostatic pills. So she went to a health food shop. She was allergic to them. She went to a health food shop where my friend worked, who was also a budding homeopath, and asked if they had anything to cope with the allergy to the cytostatic pills, which wasn't very convenient. And her friend sent her to me, and I treated her as we had been taught to treat people holistically. And I was so nervous about treating this woman that I can remember kneeling on the ground in the metro station, phoning my supervisor and making notes on a bit of paper on the ground about what I should do. I was just, how do I cope with this? But she came and I took her history, and it was one of sexual abuse and a very sad life, and things hadn't worked. I treated her first with Staphylococcus aureus and then with Natrium muriaticum. And after the Staphylococcus aureus, she said such a change had occurred. She didn't want to do any more medical treatment. She would just stick to homeopathic, thank you, and die peacefully if that's what she was meant to do, but she wasn't having any more treatment. And she stuck to that decision and she lived for another couple of years. I treated her. She went into remission. She thought she was getting better. She bought a puppy. And one day, playing with the puppy, she moved a heavy plant pot and she had a hernia. From her first operation, she had a hernia from the first cancer op for the ovarian cancer. And she ruptured the hernia and they took her to hospital to mend the hernia. And they said, did you know you have this big growth on your liver? You should get treatment. And she was so into homeopathy, she said, why don't you cut me in half and keep the hernia bit here and send the liver half to the cancer hospital? And they just looked at her. But she didn't want any more nasty cancer treatment. And she did die peacefully. And I have to say that 2 months before her death, she called me. I had her on arsenicum for the pain, nux vomica for indigestion, and her constitutional, which was sepia. All this was just, I had figured this out by this time. And she said she was very sorry. The homeopathic treatment wasn't quite enough to keep the pain away. Would it be enough for her? Would it be okay for her to take half an aspirin a day? And then she did die 2 months later. So I think that if 2 months before your death on homeopathic treatment, it's enough to take half an aspirin a day. I think there's a lot to be said for homeopathic pain treatment. So
Absolutely.
that was my highlight. It was a privilege. She did die, of course she did, but it was a privilege to go on that journey to her with her.
So, Megan, that is amazing. Just for a beginner to be able to handle those cases and just, take it. And that was where your passion took you to be able to help people in that way and touch
Yes,
their lives.
yes, yes, yes.
Wonderful. So, why and when, so we met after how many years of your starting your practice? in Argentina?
After how many years of my starting? Um, Over 20.
Wonderful. So tell me, 20 years after, what made you join, take on Argentum?
Um, I think that I read your email and I thought, and then I thought, actually, it would be really good to have somebody to supervise my cases because 20 years on, I'm still at sea with so many of them. And there are um, so many different methods, so many different approaches. You know, by the end of 20 years, you know so much, but you know it in a big mess with holes and clumps and everything else. I thought, it'd be really nice because I still get in such a mess with some of my cases and they get stuck, and I've done everything I can think of, and nothing happens. It would be lovely to be able to know where to go when I don't know where to go. And so that's why I joined onto Argentum.
That's amazing. You started with such a huge, case, taking cancer in your
Yes,
first to second year, 20 years, such a lot of experience. What was your experience in that first year or when, with Argentum? What was there something that added on to that? How did it?
absolutely. What I liked about I didn't really know what to expect, but what I love about the stages format is that it made order out of chaos. I knew I'd come across so many different approaches, and of course the materia medica gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it all gets overwhelming. And it was wonderful to be able to place some sort of structure on that and not to have to think about, oh, what is the right method for homeopathy? Maybe if I treated her by this method, I'd get somewhere. Maybe if I treated her by that method, I'd get somewhere. But to know that all these methods have a place, and it's a question of knowing which method to use when. And they're all valid. So that was the biggest um, achievement for me, the biggest add-on for me that you can classify your patient officially into some sort of type, without just thinking something vague in the back of your mind about them. You can actually decide what type of patient they are, and you can know which of all these different formulas and theories is appropriate for them. And that's brilliant. And it was so lovely not to have to jettison anything that I'd heard of because it all sounds great, but it just adds to the confusion. So,
That's interesting. So, somebody with 20 years of experience and then getting some sort of order in that chaos.
yes.
How did that help you with your patients? And how did your practice, evolve in that way when you could bring that structure in?
I think that um, I don't panic so much when I don't know where to go because I still have a long way to go, of course, but now I do know where to go. When something is just doesn't seem to be, nothing seems to be happening despite my best efforts. I know that there is another layer that I can go down to. And so that gives me a feeling of much greater confidence. My results have improved. I'm getting much more successes among my patients, I have to say. And I think that my patients are more satisfied. They are more interested to come back for, most of them, many of them, more interested to come back for follow-ups. And I think they take me as a different class of homeopath now. I sincerely think that they take me more seriously. I mean, they took me more seriously before, but they take me as a more serious class of homeopath now, I think, because they can feel that I have resources and they're part of a bigger mechanism that I am working out, even if I still don't know where I'm going, but I know that there is hope.
Give me, one of your ahas or one of your highlight cases of when you talk about layers. What? does that mean?
Um, I'm having this with a few patients now. Um, it's not quite the same, but I've been very pleased with with an autistic girl that I've been treating of 11. I hadn't treated anybody with autism before, and her mother asked me if I could help autism, and I didn't know. And I said, give me a list of the difficulties, and I will have a look at it, and I will see, if there's things I could treat there. So she gave me a list of difficulties, which is this child was very anxious. She had to be homeschooled. She couldn't be out of the sight of her mother 24/7, although she's 11 years old. She was waking in the night with screaming fits. She had digestive problems. She had phobias about vomiting. She had phobias about diarrhea. She had concentration difficulties. She had quite a run of problems. And I said to the mother, well, there's things in there that homeopathy can treat. I know. Um, for example, waking up with terrified in the night with night terrors and things like that, and the digestive disturbances. So I'll take her on, see what I can do. And then I think it was very definitely with the help that I've had from the Argentum course that I sat and I looked at her case, and I knew that, hey, there's no point in starting with any of those things on the upper layer. There's no point in giving her stramonium. There's no point in giving her something for her digestion. There's no point in this, in that, because that's not where the root of the problem lies. And I was savvy enough to not to even try those first measures, but to sit and to get down as deep as I could through the layers, which I didn't even bother to try and treat, through the layers down to what is the core. And you may remember my case. I put her on amniotic fluid, which I would never have thought of before, and she is doing brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly, and she hasn't been on anything else. That is a way that I couldn't have approached things before.
So, if I have to ask you, what's that one piece of advice you would give to homeopaths, different layer times of their practices? What would you say?
Um, what advice would I give them at different times of their
Yeah.
practice?
So, when they start, what's the advice you would give homeopaths? And when they are, say, 2 decades later, what advice would you say?
I have to say about my 2 decades that when I was in Finland, uh, homeopathy was not my day job. It sounds a lot to say I was doing it for 20 years, but I have to say that I did it alongside the day job. I did it evenings and weekends, so it wasn't like full-time practice for 20
Got it.
years.
Yeah.
And in fact, after about 10 years, I practically stopped doing it because it was so difficult for practical reasons to do it. But that's all been part of my experience. So maybe that too helps. I think that for beginning homeopaths, I think it's very important um, to have company on your journey, to have homeopaths you can talk to, who you can discuss your difficulties with, to keep you going when the going gets very thin or very rough. So I would say um, that for the beginning, it's very important not to be in isolation if you can help it, because that's depressing.
Yeah.
And right the way through, I would say, because I've been through some very thin times with it, as well as some good times. There was a very good time when I was the homeopath for the Indian Embassy in Helsinki, which was great. I had lots of patients flowing in, but everything has its season. But then there were also thin times. I would say make sure that you are always involved in homeopathy, even if it's going through a thin time, you don't have patience or you can't practice full time. Make sure you are doing something to keep the works ticking over and to keep in the field and to keep active homeopathically. I would say, if you're going through a stage where you don't have patience, treat yourself, treat your pets, treat your friends, but make sure that you keep the homeopathy active and working.
Wonderful.
Yes,
So,
yes.
what the future like? What is it that you really would like in the future with homeopathy?
Yeah, I would like to continue as long as possible. At some level or other. I If you do your maths, I'm in my 70s, well into my 70s, and your energy level goes down. The batteries are on a lower voltage. So I think that, a brisk practice of 20 patients a week I would have fallen asleep by the first lunchtime, but I would, on the level of patients that I can enjoy, I would like to keep it expand. I could still do with more patients and keep it going as long as possible. I don't remember her name, but I remember there is this South African homeopath who was still prescribing when she was 96. And I can't think of her name. And she was actually prescribing on the morning of the day that she died. I don't know that I want to go that far, but I think it's very heartening to know that somebody is was still working in their 90s. I can't see me ever packing it up entirely.
That's wonderful, and that's like such a perfect note to end on. I mean, thank you for beautifully articulating your evolution as a practitioner, but at the same time, just to see in the last 20 years, kept on with it, and then looking into the next 20 years, 30 years of your life, and that's amazing, Megan. Thank you
30
so
might be a bit optimistic, but yeah, 20 maybe.
But thank you so much for sharing and,
Thank you.
being the
It's been great.
inspiration. Now,
Thank
if
you.
there are people who are looking to join Argentum, what would you say to them?
You mean if they're deciding whether they should join or not?
Yes.
Well, everybody is different. As you say, after 20 years of experience, there may be people uh, who do know it all, who think they know it all, who don't need it. But I would say that I have gained enormously from it. I think it's been really, really, really useful and enriching. And so I would definitely give it a great thumbs up from my point of view. So, they can take that.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure and an honor and, also getting to know you that deeply. But thanks for sharing the journey.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been good fun. Thank you.